Hello and welcome to this podcast on gamification of workplace learning, where we are talking to learning leaders and experts in the domain to get their insights and learn from their experiences on this particular topic. Today, we have Animesh Kumar with us. Animesh is the President, HR and Transformation at Zee Entertainment Enterprise Limited. With over 25 years of experience, Animesh has led HR functions in large-scale Indian and multinational companies for over 15 years. In his last stint, he was associated with the Future Group as a Chief People and Transformation Officer, where he was responsible for driving internal transformation. Animesh, very welcome. I'm so happy to have you with us today, and I truly appreciate this opportunity to interact.
Amit, good morning, and thank you so much for having me on this call. It's wonderful opportunity, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation. Like I mentioned, you're the expert and I'm the practitioner, and therefore our Jugalbandi should be quite. I'm sure there's a lot for me to learn just through this conversation on gamification.
Well, thank you so much, sir. I am humbled. Thank you. So, Animesh, you have, of course, 25 years of experience, and you've led some, large organizations in HR head role. A very successful career so far. Why don't we start with your own journey in your words, and what are your key focus areas today at Zee?
So, as you're well aware, Amit, I joined Zee about 3 years ago, just slightly short of 3 years. And my journey with Zee and my, in fact, entire conversation with Zee was fascinating because when I met with Puneet, as in Puneet Goenka, and we were having the conversation and this whole there's one question that I always ask all my potential employers as to what is your expectation of me? What is your understanding of where the organization is, and what do you want the head of HR to be doing? And Puneet's answer was very simple and incredibly powerful, which was, I want to transform Zee into a truly global enterprise that competes with the best. Mm-hmm. A specific domain of media and entertainment. And that's something that really and genuinely excited me. And which was the journey that I signed up to do, and which is what I've been now focused on, which is how do we transform Zee into a global media entertainment powerhouse that is headquartered out of Mumbai, but straddles a large part of the media entertainment ecosystem in the world. I truly believe that given our repertoire of stories, the cultural context of telling stories from this corner of the globe, and I loosely look at South Asia, which is the Indian subcontinent, we have a very rich storytelling tradition. Combined with the ability to convert that into video and audio and other formats, we are truly poised to tell great stories, and great stories is what then creates virality and adoption by people. We really, in that sense, the global village language has become less relevant as long as you have the right stories to tell. So recently, about now almost 9 months ago, we embarked on a very large transformation program called Zee 4.0. Mm-hmm. Which was to really dramatically improve our size, scale, profitability, and pivot in a very large way towards digital distribution of and digital consumption of media and entertainment properties. So, which is what one is currently focused on. to drive the internal transformation that will support this strategic growth plans that we've laid out for the organization under what we call the Z 4.0 agenda.
Fantastic. It sounds like a very, very exciting agenda on hands, and definitely from HR perspective. I mean, I personally have fond memories of Z. Z started appearing on Indian television when we were very young, and it was the only option to the government Doordarshan channels.
Correct.
So more glitzy, and really just polished in every way. So of course, it's come a long way, and I really imagine what you are able to do with Z 4.0. So fantastic. I really like that conversation that you had with Puneet about, a single line agenda about transforming the organization. And we can't say, enough about how much HR has to play a role in that. Very exciting. Thank you for sharing that, Animesh. Animesh, moving on to something which is more central to our topic today, which is around training. And since you have been, at Z and at other places been involved in transformations, which would have involved a lot of training, what in your view makes training successful? And where does gamification specifically come in that? What role can it play?
That's so many questions, Amit.
Let's break it into two. What makes training successful?
Yeah, I think that's there are really two parts to that in my experience. And one really to create a sustainable, successful training ecosystem, you need to address both ends of the spectrum, which is it needs to be relevant and meaningful and contextual for the organization, because that's the entity that is funding, supporting, and driving the agenda.
Yep.
And the second part is really to make the training programs itself exciting, interesting, relevant, and meaningful for the learner, which is the employee. And it's really when both of these come together that you create sustainable and successful training programs or training agendas in an organization. I've always looked at training, and this has been my my framework of having conversations around learning. And training, I think, is a narrower narrative. I think I prefer the broader narrative of learning, honestly. And from when I started my career to where I am today, I think learning is evolved into a 4-quadrant framework. And very simply put, one is time and the other is money. Mm-hmm. And so there's company time and company money, and there is employee time and employee money, or learner time, whichever. And most organizations are really now looking at learning from that framework. So there is amount of thing that you do which is on company time, company money, but there are also ways of creating learning which are on company money, your time, or company time but your own money. And we need to really expand learning to fill those two quadrants. Mm-hmm. The last one obviously is where employees are investing in their own time, own money, and I think as the change cycles reduce, the rates of disruption increase. What I'm very, very heartened by is more and more people are really focusing on continuous learning on their own time, own money, as an investment that they are making into their own sustainable relevance, success, all of those pieces. So that's the way I've looked at learning. And so two key themes, Amit. One is, I think, context for employers and context for learners. And the second is, how do you expand learning and enable learning to expand into two other separate quadrants, which is where you're able to magnify and really utilize the full spectrum of learning opportunities and learning interventions. So that's the way I would look at that.
So fantastic. I mean, I really like the framework that you just shared with us, which is, onto two axes, you have employee time and company time versus employee expense versus company expense. And company time, company expense is something that has been going on for a long time. We are beginning to see other quadrants, and continuous learners are those who are spending their money and then their time to keep themselves, relevant and sharpest for the coming opportunities, whether inside an organization or outside an organization. So you will obviously find some people who are doing that. So for an organization, keeping this in mind, are there elements that you would look at that would make this training or learning initiatives more powerful? And again, I'll just add on to my previous question to this, which is, does gamification hold a place there?
So gamification has really been is seen very often as a very recent addition to the whole learning repertoire, and I have a slightly different take on that, Amit. Simulations have been an integral part of creating learning for the longest time.
Yeah.
Given that I've been a war trivia and war history buff, I can tell you that that in right from von Clausewitz or other great military thinkers, simulations and running large-scale simulations. Earlier, it was on replica maps built to scale. And as things have evolved, simulations have become more and more sophisticated. Has been one of the best ways to train people who lead large armies and large groups of people on looking at playing out battlefield simulations and then improving how you would actually deploy in case there was real conflict. The other industry which has really adopted simulations and gamification in that sense has been the airline industry, where before pilots get onto actually flying large planes, they spend a lot of time on very realistic simulators. Unfortunately, the adoption of gamification in other parts of learning and in other kinds of business sectors was always hampered by the cost of creating simulations or the cost of gamification. The increase in Moore's law, other drivers of what has really brought down the cost of trying to gamify learning has really driven adoption of gamification over the last, I think, 4 or 5 years. But more broadly, I think over a decade, gamification has continued to acquire strides across the entire corporate, all corporates and across all sectors. I think gamification does some very interesting things which other forms of learning are unable to do. There's some things gamification can't do, and we'll park those aside. But when you look at gamification, it really is building on, I think, 2 insights. One is holding interest of the learner. Mm-hmm. And they do that by building off the natural dopamine loops, natural dopamine that using dopamine as a way to drive more and more game-playing behavior, which has been what has been adopted by game makers the world over, and which is why gaming is such a fast-growing industry globally, and they've brought that insight into learning. And the second one is really the fact that as a learner, I'm able to control the time, the place, and the quantum of learning I want to go through at any given point in time. So the flexibility combined with very building it around a very natural human process is what I think makes gamification so powerful and so much easier to adopt and drive within the organization, within any corporation. What I think is been our learning at Zee, and as we built the whole digital induction with you, and we were discussing about how do we bring gamification to values and things like that, which has been that you really need to sweat the design.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
In traditional formats of gaming, there is an opportunity to continuously iterate and improve and fix the delivery end of it, because you do one batch and then you do second batch, and every batch you can keep improving it if there are issues that you find in either the design or in the delivery process. Unfortunately, gamification doesn't allow for that, or it does, but it's a more expensive iteration. So focusing and spending time, like I said, sweating the design part or sweating during the design part is really, I think, the key to making gamification work well within organizations. So huge, I think, advantages of using gamifications as a way to drive learning within companies.
Fantastic. I mean, so many interesting points you mentioned, Animesh, over there. And let me, just pick on each of those. So two main items that you mentioned, apart from simulations, of course. So simulations, I see as something which is probably close cousin of games, though they are very realistic in the environment that you create, and the actions that you do are also very realistic. So whether it's for the army or the pilots, they are actually operating exactly similar stuff that they would do in real life. With games, you can get a little fictitious, you can get, fantasy worlds, etc. So the principles and theory may remain same on which you may be doing things. So mental processes could be same, but you may be operating a different kind of a lever. You may be talking to, demons. You may be in a fantasy land and doing similar things, negotiating with, monsters, whatever. So, but essentially slightly different environment. But yes, these are very close cousins. Of course, costs have come down dramatically over the years. But the two key points that you talked about what makes gamification interesting is dopamine loops and the control that a learner has in deciding. And so control, of course, is a big part of how individuals would want to behave and what motivates them. Like Dan Pick says, control is one of the big things, which, so if they have autonomy over what they are able to do, they would be more interested in doing that. Around dopamine, you talked about dopamine, leveraging that. So is there a specific point there, or is it just about because gamification gives rewards and unlocks things for people at some level, or maybe they are competing with others at some level, that is what is really driving their dopamine levels in this?
So one of the things that is a well-kept secret, Amit, is that I'm a gamer.
We know it.
And I think what keeps you going back to gaming, or what keeps me going back to gaming, is there's always an unpredictability of outcome. Mm-hmm. So it's only through improving your skill level and getting better at the game that you can win. If you're not going to do that, then and that is what I think creates the high. So when you win at the end of whatever you're doing, whether it's a gamification within with a very specific agenda around a specific outcome that you're looking at, or you're playing a gaming game, any other kind of game, winning creates a huge high. That's the whole format of why you keep going back to it. But winning is not guaranteed.
Yeah.
And I think without having spent enough amount of research around the whole dopamine and how dopamine works within the in a physiological sense, that is what I think keeps the gaming cycle, the learning cycle going.
Mm.
The fact that you need to do some things, it's not specific, it's not a given, and there is effort that you're expending in getting to that outcome. But I know you're the expert on the subject, so would love to hear what you had to share on this.
No, this is very interesting. I definitely agree that the variability of rewards or outcomes can be very exciting, and in fact, research suggests that people the dopamine release is actually higher when you are not knowing what is going to happen. If it is a constant reward, then you won't get excited. A great example of that I picked up from this book, Hooked by Neil Rayal, was just to demonstrate this was, imagine if you opened your refrigerator and every time there was a different sweet dish that you could see, then that is releasing dopamine because you don't know what you will see next. So something like that. So just to give context to that. But yes, absolutely, variability is the key there, and we need to see how we can build it in our solutions. I also think what you mentioned is very, very crucial, which is because of this, you are focused on improving your skills. So every time you go to this package, a game or a gamified solution, what you are focused on is, can I do better than what I did earlier? And that's a huge mindset change for learners. If they were to just come to a solution and say, let me get off this, let me just get done with it. Instead of saying that, if they say, let me improve, there is a big change that you've already achieved. And, think of it, there have been games which have been built for failure. Uh, think of games like Tetris. Nobody has ever won that game. You really continue to improve because there is no win state in that game. But it draws you again and again. So you keep trying and improve your skills and keep, possibly increasing your skill level and being happy about that. And that's really in my view, the best reward, which is the joy of learning leading to more learning, or anything. Playing can lead to more play because that is releasing that happy chemicals in your mind to say, I want to do this more.
Absolutely. And I think that is the power of gamification because, and I haven't cracked this problem yet, but most of us don't like to learn. Learning is not your natural state. All learning puts you in an uncomfortable position. Whether it is and in more traditional setups where there's very clearly a power distance or a power equation between the person teaching and the person learning. And nobody likes being in an inferior power position. Also, the moment you get into learning, you have to first acknowledge that there's something that you don't know. And I think corporations and society at large is not comfortable dealing with the whole aspect of or being in that space I don't know. So I think therefore most of us don't like to learn or are not comfortable to naturally be in a state where you want to learn, especially after you've started working or been joined a corporation. How gamification cuts through that is that you're actually doing what you enjoy. And learning becomes a corollary outcome of doing an activity that you enjoy, which is winning or playing or building skill in a way that is you're doing it without realizing that you're building that skill. So that's what I think is truly unique about the whole gamification angle on and integrating it into learning programs. There's absolutely no question in mind that it's one part of learning. I mean, it's not the whole set of learning tools that are available and that should be deployed in an organization. But I'm quite excited about this, and I think as as the cost of development becomes cheaper, what we will find is that the quality of gamification and the whole user experience of playing a game will become customer grade. Today, there's a big difference between customer grade games or customer grade gamification that happens vis-a-vis employee grade gamification that happens. And we've spoken about this at length. But I think it's just a matter of while there will always be a certain difference, because one is in that sense a for-profit activity and the other is an investment. But if we can continue to move the needle on that continuum, I think we'll be able to gamify more and more things that we need to learn within organizations.
True. Again, I think the original point in this section that you made about power equations and not feeling good about telling anybody that we don't know it. I think it's more of a culture and social construct that we have in organizations, which I think is gradually changing, with business leaders coming out in open saying that it's okay to fail or not know. I mean, most famous ones being the Microsoft CEO. Satya Nadella, who's simply saying, we don't want people who are know-alls. We want people who can learn all, because the world is so dynamic. Knowledge keeps getting upgraded. And if you are sitting where you are, you would be definitely left behind. So I think that whole construct is changing. It has to change from top down to create that environment to say, yes, we don't know, we are learning, and everybody will essentially pick it up. But absolutely, there's so much social construct or context within which learning happens. It's very difficult for people to recognize or even accept that they need some learning in this and they don't know this. Absolutely. You also touched on one point, which I really liked, the phrase, which was, I think, more as an experience of the program that we did for you. And thank you for that opportunity. We really appreciate that project. Around sweating the design, because that is something that a lot of times, at least I find, that organizations may want to rush through. And if you don't rush through that and are able to really work through the design process a little longer, iterate it well enough, then the output is going to be much, much, much better. And you would have much better results. Do you want to explain a little more? How do you see that sweat the design part a little?
So that's I don't know how to explain that in more detail.
Let's go back to maybe what you did for the program.
So maybe that's what I was coming to. That maybe an example. So when we decided to do that entire digital induction that we decided to, and it became more than a digital induction. Actually, is a program that we are using, or we used, and we need to go back and redo it because we've launched Zee 4.0. But we used to really get all existing employees up the curve on the whole history and of the organization. And it was a program that, just to put it in context, we hired our chief legal officer, Shamla Venkatachalam, and because we were in this lockdown and this whole, virtual working format, where it was slightly more difficult to get standard inductions, which typically happen for leaders going, I asked Shamla to say, listen, why don't you just spend the couple of hours that it takes to go through the 7 levels of our digital induction, and that'll give you a very good idea of the whole organization. And she did that, and she came back saying, completely blown away. I said, look, I can't imagine having done or played a game like a digital induction game that you had designed, which was the Zee Avatar and all of those things that we had done. But I really enjoyed it. And 2, it was incredibly informative. And I feel that I really get Zee. I mean, both from not just the informational aspects, but somehow you managed to capture the cultural nuance of what Zee is. And I think, and now bringing it back to in the design phase, I think what the way we went about designing that, it was iterative. That we starting from laying out all the topics that we wanted to cover, bringing in the construct of what are the key values of the organization, and how do you build a subliminal theme that is not obvious and kind of in your face, but that is what is informing the design of the game, to making sure that information sources and all the various inputs, including videos of various induction programs that we had done and brought that into context. And I think the most important thing that we did was we drove the design through a much younger population that was typically going to be the user of this entire piece. I know that I stress tested this entire digital induction that we designed by asking a 16-year-old kid. This is the son of one of our senior employees, and I asked him to stress test. So I went and asked him, look, you play games for a living. So go through this whole thing and tell me what are the things that you would improve, that you find boring or you think that is repetitive, etc. And he came back with some phenomenal insights that we then brought it back and incorporated it into the design conversation that we were having. So when I say sweat the design, there isn't a one-size-fits-all approach. There never is for anything in life, I think. But looking at induction and making sure that we in our case, looked at it from so many perspectives. And we did spend close to 4 or maybe 5 months. And then we had the whole API integration challenge that took a little more time. But we did spend that kind of time designing the whole intervention, which is what I think made it so much easier to adopt. We also sneakily embedded our entire POSH training into that, because diversity, inclusion, safety is such a critical part of and that it all kind of came together, because through the process of playing the game, we also managed to get something that most people don't like doing, because it's a compliance thing.
Yes.
Embedded into that, and we now have 100% POSH adoption or POSH training completion, because people are just going through the whole digital induction and playing the game.
Wow. Oh, that's lovely. I know, yes, completions is, of course, the first level that we can think of, and especially for compliance training, which if it has not been completed well enough in past, this is a good sign. I'm very happy to note that you did all of that testing through 16-year-olds who were not involved in the business, because that would have given some unique insights which some of your staff members would have come up with. But then all of that has really contributed in making it a product that it is. In fact, we were discussing this a little while ago about revising those designs again and again and again. And there is this term called play testing for games and gamification, which is what I think you did at your end in limited way. And that is what is possibly showing in the end output. I'm so happy to hear your legal officers, chief legal officers comments as well. It makes me very happy. So yeah, thank you so much for going through all of that process and sweating the design out. I think the end product is something that makes, I'm sure your team happy, but definitely our team also happy.
It makes our team a lot less burdened, because just otherwise getting induction through can be a huge activity. Yeah. So besides being, obviously the designers are happy and the people who led that, but everybody else is released that much more time, because one key part of the entire onboarding process and induction people into the company, the culture, the values, how do do things in the organization is taken care of through this whole gamified process.
Yeah. Well, we can continue talking about this. Both of us love that, but we'll move on to something else and find a different opportunity to explore that in more detail. So, Animesh, a lot of times organizations who have wanted to do games and gamification in their training see that senior stakeholders would find it a little frivolous, childlike, non-serious, etc. I mean, of course, Z is fortunate to have you who doesn't see it like that, but I don't know if your senior stakeholders, anybody found it that way, or if people find it that way. Uh, what is the way to really resolve that? Because I do see that as a challenge sometimes for L&D teams to adopt gamification in their learning programs. So a perception challenge, if I can call it.
I think in many ways I'm truly blessed in the role, because in my senior stakeholder group, whether it's Rahul, who leads our revenue business, or Puneet, who leads our content, and Puneet Goenka, and I keep saying Puneet Goenka and Puneet because we have multiple Puneets, like
yes,
Amits that we were talking about. So both PG, as we call him, or Amit, they are all absolutely supportive of all innovation, experimentation that we want to do. I think one of the upsides of being in an entrepreneurial organization is there is willingness to fail. There is you want to try things, you want to do it in a frugal manner, and frugality is frugality is often a term that leads for people to think that you're cheap. It's not about cheap; it's about extracting value for money. So as long as you're bringing that, and you want to try something new and with all the right intent, and something doesn't work, it's absolutely fine. I mean, you can't make a habit of it, but therefore there is that opportunity to experiment and play around a little bit with some new things and new concepts. So that gives me the space to try new things. We tried something completely new. I mean, just as a complete aside, and since we're on the subject of learning, in 2019, we launched a program called Embark. And unlike many organizations, and this is all in the context of transformation, right? The first conversation we had, which was, we were spending the largest amount of our learning and development budgets on our frontline managers. Mm-hmm. Because my entire pitch was that, listen, if you want to transform organizations, frontline managers are linchpins that drive these kinds of transformations, whether it is about acting culture or acting as force multipliers for performance, etc. And while we had not launched anything specific on leadership development, the organization was more than happy and very supportive of doing something which was focused on frontline managers before we went into doing leadership development. The fact is that all of it needs to come together. There is no single arrow or Rambam that will solve the problem on transformation. But that's one part of it. I think where we got it right, and even if that does sound like arrogant, and I have no intention of being there, I think the fact that we spent time thinking through the design of this, sweating the design, as we referred to earlier, Amit, is what worked. The opportunity of gamification is that, or the risk of gamification is that sometimes, or let me put it this way, to use more mathematical or geometry, it is a necessary. Sweating the design is a necessary, not a sufficient condition. If you don't sweat the design, you're designed to fail.
Yeah.
But sweating the design is a necessary condition. You also need a certain amount of luck. I mean, sometimes with all the sweat, you don't catch something that is there. And you need to go back and get learnings and bring it back to the iteration and revise certain things that are there. I know I've rambled on, and I don't know if I answered your question, but building senior stakeholder buy-in into anything that you're doing. And it's not specific to gamification of learning, whether it's in performance, anything that you do which is employee facing cannot succeed without full buy-in of all your senior stakeholders.
Right.
That's just a given. And so that's a large part of my job, which is really paving the way. And actual delivery is done by everybody else in the team. I have very little to do on that side. So in this case, it was Sukanya and a lot of other people, Dheeraj and Amit, who were leading and driving that entire piece. My job was to really make sure that the senior most stakeholders in the organization are fully backing this effort. And that's what my takeaway has been in this entire process.
Well, that's a great perspective, and I think you will need so many people to collaborate, especially the HR head or L&D head should be taking up that role where once they are themselves convinced, they should be really getting all the senior stakeholders on board. And while the rest of the team can continue to develop a great product, they can go through the iterations along with the team, but it's up to the head who's really bringing everyone else on board. That's so important. Fantastic. Animesh, any advice that you may have for other L&D folks, apart from this that we just discussed, if they want to get started with gamification, what should they do? What should they not do? What is right? What is not right? Based on your experiences.
I generally, and I'm uncomfortable giving advice, Amit, because just as I'm generally uncomfortable with this whole benchmarking format, because both ignore the context in which something needs to be done. So, but first piece, or my insight and my experiences, be very alive to the context in which you're operating. Without the context, everything else is all advice can become completely irrelevant. It's so once you've understood the context, then you need to bring in whatever is the intervention that you're designing around in your gamification journey, and land it right. Getting your initial successes is absolutely imperative to make sure that this journey progresses well. Mm-hmm. So if it means that you start small, you experiment small, you iterate small, create success, demonstrate the efficacy of this methodology of driving learning and development, then maybe that's the way you need to do that. In my experience, especially when it comes to gamification, getting a prototype tested and examined by a bunch of younger users, especially your frontline and employees, and bringing their feedback, A, into the design, but B, into the conversation that you're having with senior folks. Sure. To say that, look, this is what is getting adopted. This is what is getting used without the traditional stick and carrot approach that one needs to adopt on any kind of learning and development program. Is the other, I think, data factoid that really helps in the conversation that you have with senior leaders. So let me stop there. Like I said, advice is not something I think is easy to
But this is, actually wonderful advice, and I think straight from the trenches because you've done that. So context absolutely important. Small wins, maybe low hanging ones, but showing some success and building on that. And thirdly, bringing your junior folks, the younger ones, into the design mix as well as conversation in terms of influencing that conversation with senior folks. I think brilliant. Thank you so much. I think this will be really, really useful to people who listen to this. Animesh, I think we've come to the end of this. I'm sure people will want to, people already know you, but people who don't know you, if they have to connect with you, should they just reach out to you on LinkedIn, or is there a better way?
I think LinkedIn is the most comfortable for me, and that's the one that's the only social media platform that I truly engage with. The others I'm not really on, so LinkedIn is the best, and that would be the best way to connect.
Fantastic. Fantastic. I'm sure a lot of people would want to connect. And thank you so much, Animesh. It's been a fantastic conversation. I've learned so much today. There's so many things that you have listed over today in today's conversation. Thank you for your time, for sharing your wisdom and experiences. I'm sure our listeners will benefit from this.
Amit, always a pleasure chatting with you. Look forward to doing some more exciting work.
Fantastic. Thank you. You have a lovely day.
You too. Thanks a ton.
Bye-bye.
Bye.